Photographs are rewriting the narrative of America's racist prison system by analyzing the modern reality of incarceration for African Americans. Black people in America are disproportionately victims of the prison complex, and historically, photography has perpetuated this narrative by what has and what has not been shown to the public. More recently, photography has been rewriting this narrative, bringing awareness to the system of oppression, and by shifting the lens, photography is shedding a light on the mass incarceration of African Americans and what narratives have been missing from the public's views. Racism has been perpetuated through a lack of photographs. Even though the 13th Amendment granted freedom for African Americans by abolishing enslavement and involuntary servitude, Southern legislators, law enforcement, and private businesses devised new ways to enslave them. Jim Crow laws, lifetime labor contracts, debt peonage, and black codes are just a few examples of this. Through the punishment clause, black bodies were reappropriated for non-compensated labor, enslaved once again, but this time through the prison system. The Eighth Amendment, which is the Cruel and Unusual Punishment Clause, prohibits the implementation of cruel and unusual punishments towards prisoners, but it allows slavery to persist. Without current images of incarcerated African Americans, how is the general public to know about the cruel and unusual punishments that continue to occur in the American prison system today? The racialization of African Americans in terms of mass incarceration cannot be ignored, but it has not been widely photographed, so the general public is still unaware. In the article, The Mugshot, A Brief History, Simone Brown wrote, "Blackness is already under scrutiny, while whiteness is defined by not being put on display. Surveillance is a racialized optic." When the mugshot was invented in the early 1900s, photographs of black inmates were purposely not published for the public to view because blackness is always under scrutiny from the viewer, already under racial surveillance. This still applies today. Brian Stevenson, who was interviewed in Truth and Reconciliation, stated, "There is so little photography or imagery that exposes the inhumanity of enslavement. It's almost as if there was a real effort to avoid visual documentation that might have implicated us and revealed our complicity in facilitating such great suffering." Racial terrors such as lynching and police brutality have helped to shape the United States criminal justice system. Visual documentation of racial terror has only been made public in recent years because citizens now have the ability to capture such acts with smartphones and other devices. Visualizations of racial terror in the past were purposely hidden or not produced in order to uphold and continue the system of oppression. Civil rights leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks utilized the press and visual documentation to support the civil rights movement and reframe criminality and rights-based behavior as actually a positive and active citizenship, according to Sarah Lewis. The image of Dr. King taken by Charles Moore in 1958 is an iconic example of this. In the picture, police are violently arresting Martin Luther King Jr. Viewers can see the fear in his eyes. He fears for his life, being assaulted by multiple police officers. Coretta Scott King, Dr. King's wife, boldly stands on the right side of the picture, showing courage and strength, though she may be fearing for both of their lives as well. Photos such as this one marked a turning point in how the public viewed what America labeled as criminals. The public has seen a visualization of police brutality towards African Americans for the first time through the media. Contemporary photographs of African American inmates are changing the narrative. Dred Scott is a visual artist whose works mainly focus on the experience of African Americans in the United States today. Scott's project Lockdown is a work of photography showcasing the stories of just a few of the over 2 million people in today's prison system being locked down. These photographs give inmates power on how the public sees them. They are given a platform to tell their stories instead of their stories being told through the prison system, which often twists their own stories. Harmed and Dangerous is another photo project by Dred Scott, featuring pictures of armed Black and Latino men and women holding guns pasted above a prison booth. This project plays a looped recording of a person speaking about violence. And lastly, Dred Scott's Historic Corrections is a photo exhibit that is a combination of multiple elements. First, a photograph of a Black man being lynched, then a series of photos of Black and Latino urban youth. These photographs are locked up by bars on one side of the picture, imprisoning the subjects. If viewers look at the other side of the photos, they are able to build their own narrative on how they see the subjects. And lastly, a replica of an electric chair can be seen in the middle of the exhibit. Keith Calhoun and Chandra McCormick are photographers documenting life in Louisiana. Slavery, the prison industrial complex, is an ongoing project started by Calhoun and McCormick in the 1980s. This project serves as a historical record documenting the life of African Americans with the Angeloa Penitentiary. The penitentiary is also known as the farm, since it is an 1,800-acre prison farm where inmates are forced to labor. In the photographs, viewers can see a flood of inmates in the fields, wearing white shirts and hats to shade from the harsh sun, holding scythe-like tools. Carrying guns on horseback, white guards tower over the inmates in such a way as to intimidate and terrorize them. The photographs look like they could have been taken in the 1800s, not the 1980s or the 2000s. Though slavery has been abolished by the 13th Amendment, it continues to legally persist in the Louisiana State Penitentiary. In the article, Marking Time, the author Nicole R. Fleetwood tells the story of her cousin Alan, who was sentenced to life in prison in 1994 at the age of 18. While serving his sentence, Nicole and Alan sent pictures to each other, Nicole's photos being from the outside world and Alan's being from inside the prison. Many of the photos Alan sent to his cousin were studio portraits taken by incarcerated photographers. While some of these photographs are of Alan standing with props in front of colorful backdrops created by prisoners, many of them are of him, Nicole, and his mother. These studio photographs of prisoners with family members are common within groups that are most impacted by mass incarceration, but are unnoticed by the general public. These photographs counteract mugshots, which depict prisoners as hostile and dangerous, showing them instead with their families and significant others. These studio portraits also show the inmates typically smiling, posing in front of backdrops that depict a life outside of the prison. This is an opportunity for inmates to picture themselves in the future, not confined by prison walls or cells. Photography has both left out and included voices and stories of those disproportionately impacted by America's prison complex. The public's access to cameras and media has added narratives to the story and has made racial terror targeted towards African Americans more visible, leading to action and reform. Though we still have a long way to go, prison reform is slowly taking place because of visual documentation of life in prisons.